Well, it is 3:45 in Chicago, which is 4:45 Eastern. So I think it's time to get started. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us this afternoon. I am Jen Collins Moore, author of the Maggie White Mystery Series and president of Sisters in Crime Chicagoland. And I am so excited to be here today moderating this panel of fantastic authors and talking about their mouthwatering books. The session is called Cozy Up with Comfort Food, Cozy Mysteries That Feed Your Imagination, and we are going to have a lot of fun. I am going to leave time at the end of our conversation for Q&A. I have plenty of questions lined up, but I think that often the most interesting questions come from our audience, so please don't hold back. Put anything you're thinking about in the Q&A function of the webinar, because we would love to use that to really drive our conversation. And just put things in there as you think of them. Don't feel like you need to wait for me to say, okay, it's now time for questions. And there's also going to be a bookstore link in the chat, so be sure to look at that. Check out these great books that we're going to be talking about and hopefully find some that you want to take home. And with that, I am here with Debra H. Goldstein, Leslie Budewitz, Mia P. Manansala, Korina and Raquel V. Reyes. And you have all seen their impressive resumes on all the conference materials. So rather than have me read that to you, I'd like for you to get to know our authors through their characters. So Mia, let's get started with you. Tell us about your detective Lila and what you love about her.
Sure. So my protagonist for the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series is Lila Macapagal. She's pretty young. She's only 25 years old. She is originally from a fictional small town called Shady Palms, which is a few hours outside of Chicago in Illinois. And the book series starts with her life having kind of fallen apart in a very rom-com heroine kind of way. And so the first book is actually, it is very much a murder mystery, but it's almost like an adult coming of age of her trying to relearn what her life looks like after things kind of fall apart and reimagine what home is, what success is, and things like that. And what I love about my heroine is that she can be selfish, but she is also extremely loyal. And so, she's at a point of her life when she's very much like, oh, why me? Why don't, why am I here? Again, she left for Chicago to go to school, caught her fiance cheating on her with her neighbors, plural, had to go back home. She's tasked with saving, her family's dying restaurant. And then her ex-boyfriend dies in said restaurant and she's accused of the murder. So she has like a lot to whine about. But when it comes to protecting her family and her friends, she is the person who will step up and kind of put that aside and do what needs to be done.
I love that. And I just love the rom-com introduction because like in the world of mysteries, just having that through line through it just makes it so much fun.
Thank you.
Korina, tell us about Willa.
So Willa Bauer is a 33-year-old cheesemonger, which is basically a cheese expert. And she's moved to a small town in the Sonoma Valley, California, to open her own cheese shop, which is a dream she's had for years. But it was derailed years ago through a few heartaches, which you learn about in the first cheese shop mystery, Cheddar Off Dead. But this also made her hesitant to put down roots anywhere and trust some people. And so when she opens her cheese shop and then shortly thereafter a murder occurs right outside of it, she's the prime suspect. She has to decide who she's going to trust and do it fast. And so this puts her in even a more uncomfortable position of doing that, but it also makes a very tight-knit, loyal group that goes on throughout the series. And so what I love most about her is her willingness to do this after the things that have occurred to her in the past. And then also that she trusts herself and her instincts above all others. She listens to other people, the detective, the other people around, but I think it's just an important message kind of to, especially as a woman, to trust yourself and your own instincts, even with a lot of people, talking to you and saying different things. And I also love her devotion to cheese, which I also share with Willa.
And I suspect many of your readers do as well. Raquel, can you introduce us to Miriam?
Sure. Miriam Quinones Smith is a food anthropologist. She has a doctor in front of her name. She's PhD. I purposely had her be a PhD because Latinas are underrepresented in the doctoral, and that or if they're there, they get pushed out. But anyhow, she's a food anthropologist. She moves from New York back to Miami. Her in-laws have offered them a great deal. We'll help you get a house, that kind of a thing. So she moves back and she's missed the cycle to apply to become for universities. She's missed that academic cycle. So her best friend says, hey, why don't you take this position as a cooking show host? And she's like, I'm not a celebrity chef. I'm an academic. This is not what I do. She's like, oh, but you're a great chef. So she ends up taking it. And then she kind of becomes this local celebrity, not kind of, she is this local celebrity, and it's a Spanish language network. And I have a lot of fun with that because I get to explore not only the food, but the culture and the history behind the food of why we eat what we eat. As far as her sleuthing, I like to call her a reluctant sleuth. She does not want to have anything to do with any of this. She falls in with the local detective who happens to be Black. She's a Latina. This is a very white, kind of rich enclave within Miami. And he's like, you've married into this family. You can at least ask a few questions that I can't ask and be my ears. So they fall into this, convenient, cozy mystery trope of that. But he jokingly calls her Veronica Mars. And she's like, I don't want to be Veronica Mars. I don't want to be Jessica Fletcher. I don't want to be any of them. So I have a little bit of fun with that.
Love that. Leslie, you have 2 different series. Tell us about your detectives.
So my main series right now is the Seattle Spice Shop Mysteries, and my main character, Pepper Reese, runs a spice shop in Pike Place Market, which I'm sure many of you know. It is the heart and soul and stomach of Seattle, the longest continuously running farmers market in the country since 1907, I think. And it's a place I fell in love with well back in the last century as a college freshman. And so when I decided to write a second series, this was a natural place for me to go. Raquel and I are both writing the urban cozy, the community within a community. And that is just the perfect definition of Pike Place Market. Pepper, despite her name, came to running a spice shop at 40 when her life fell apart. This is a common thing, I think, in cozy world for major changes to set our amateur sleuths onto their criminal ways. And so when her life fell apart, she bought the spice shop. Who wouldn't, right? And it has become a really great place, a great way for me to explore not just food, but also community. And, to me, that is the heart of community, is the heart of any amateur sleuth, but primarily the cozy mystery. That is the heart of it. And a character who can use her job skills and connections to move around the community has a real advantage. That's also what my girl Erin does, and I can call her a girl because she's at this point several decades younger than I am, right? She is the main character in the Food Lovers Village Mysteries, my first series, which is set in a small lakeside resort community in northwestern Montana, I guess where I live. And she takes over a struggling business, a local foods market, in her family's 100-year-old grocery in the heart of the village. And as with Pepper, Erin has these local connections that allow her to explore, to see things, to make connections that the law enforcement does not have. My view is that the murder or the crime is a disruption of the social order. And while the external investigation, the official investigation is focused on restoring that external order, our characters do that, but they also restore the social order. What does that better than food?
I love that. And Debra, there's been a theme in the detectives we've talked about, but I feel like yours is a little bit from a different mold. Tell us about Sarah.
Well, Sarah has one disadvantage to all of the others. She was married at 18, divorced at 28, and the only thing she got out of that marriage, and I'll hold it up because he's cute, was Rara, the Siamese cat, and some very clumsy, horrible cooking skills. Now, she does have a twin sister who is a culinary expert, a chef, who wants to go to the top of the world in the restaurant business. But Sarah, like me, is the kind of person who rapidly learns, that the codes on your stove, if they say things like F8, you blew it up. If it's F6, it's only on fire. I go for fun in the books, but Sarah is an evolving sleuth. Like most of them, she takes place in a small town, but she knows that starting over was going to be messy, but she didn't expect the very first thing in her life to be that her ex-husband would be killed with a bite of her twin sister's rhubarb, casserole. So you're going to find in my books a lot of family, and I think that's true in almost everybody's books because I've read everybody in the series, who's up here. We all have strong family connections. We may not like our mother-in-laws. We may not like every aspect of them, but they're there. And as my book evolves, the character of Sarah becomes stronger through the 5 things. And that's what I like. I like the evolution of Sarah. I like her loyalty to people. And I like the humor because I don't know about you guys, but you like cheese, you like spice, you like, different culinary expertises. I like to eat out, and that's Sarah. She makes reservations and she takes in food. And unless her sister leaves her a care package, she's in trouble. That's why in the first book, you'll find recipes like Jell-O in a can.
Well, and I think we're hitting on some really important threads here about what makes these books so comforting and the idea of returning society, getting that balance back in swing, and the importance of family. And food, obviously is something that plays into that. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. Like, as you were sitting down to write these books, what made you say, I want food to be an important part of it? Was it conscious? Did it just happen? Korina, why don't you start us off?
Well, in my case, the book was decided by an editor, the cheese theme, but then I took over from there. And so as I was thinking about that, it was cheese is classic. Everybody knows cheese. It's universally eaten and loved. Everybody has a visceral reaction almost to cheese, and I've learned that even more by writing these books. There's very few people who are like, cheese. It's either, oh my God, I love cheese, or it's, oh, I don't like cheese. Very few weirdos, but no, but so, and it's also, so it's very comforting, but it's also very communal. You always have cheese at any party or gathering. It's very easy to have that. And so when I was thinking about Willa's relationship with cheese, it's the one thing that she's always been comforted from. She grew up in a dairy farming family, and that wasn't really her thing. She didn't love it as much as her parents and her brother, but they did have a little farmstead creamery. And she found, when she was a young teenager, she finally convinced her parents to let her sell their cheese at farm stands. And she found a real connection to people and a confidence in herself, knowing about cheese and the way she felt about it. And then when she went to spend a semester in France in college, she was going to just do nothing with her dairy farming or childhood. She wanted to do something completely different, but she found that she was drawn to the comfort of this little cheese shop outside of Lyon. And so, you know, that her comfort really is home. And so cheese is really home. And so even though, you know, she doesn't go back home, she goes someplace completely new. That's where the comforts of cheese come from for her.
Well, and that's so interesting about sort of it's revealing something about her character, that it's not just sort of an external piece. For Raquel, how did you make that choice? Did an editor sort of come up with the idea of a food anthropologist? Did you say, let me sort of think about how I want to bring Miriam to life? Like, how did you decide on that?
She was always going to be a food anthropologist. I mean, but now why did I start writing a culinary cozy? I had written some other cozies before, you know, manuscripts. And I thought, well, because I write Spanglish, my characters are always going to speak in Spanglish, you know, and I wanted very much to write a something set in Miami. The idea of a city cozy, I really, really liked. And I love Miami. I wanted to, you know, give Miami its proper. So she was always going to be a food anthropologist. I love to cook, I love to eat, but I'm not a every single day at it kind of person. Miami's very hot. Some days I don't want to be in the kitchen, you know? So I knew that when writing this, how can I introduce the reading public to Miami and what are the things that I love about Miami? And Miami's called the gateway to the Caribbean. And so her being a food anthropologist and specializing in the Caribbean, I could talk about the culture, I could talk about the history, I could have some food and a few recipes in there, not a whole bunch, but I love to talk about the food, right? But talking about what your editor or your publisher does or doesn't do, my manuscript, I had the cooking show arc starting later and being a little longer for her to get into. And my editor's like, nope, push it up. So I put that in the first chapter. So that did change, but everything else was basically kind of there.
Well, and that idea of it giving you a vehicle to explore themes that you wanted to talk about, sort of how can I talk about Miami and make people excited about it? Food is such a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Leslie,
and the history of the Caribbean too, which is
right.
something, yeah.
To get sort of all those, food tells us so much about a character, and it almost seems, does it make it easier, Leslie, to have food there for your character? Does that sort of, when you're trying to figure out what to write, like, does that make the craft of writing easier for you?
Well, it does tell me that there is it gives me a focus, a focal point. I want to go back to something Raquel said. She was talking about her choice of the occupation for Miriam. And personally, I think the food anthropology is a brilliant choice because Miriam she's got this academic understanding, and yet there she is making things on TV, and she's also feeding a little one at home and feeding the family, and she's got that perspective, and she can blend those things together so beautifully. I'm not saying it all that well, but I really think she is a great choice, a great blend, and that was a really smart choice on your part. Plus, it's a lot of fun. Food anthropology, you wouldn't really think about that. I mean, most of us don't even think about that as a career, right? It wasn't featured on career day in high school, but it turns out to be a terrific path into the story. My characters both run retail shops, and that's deliberate because unlike a lot of cozy mystery authors who write about food, I have never worked in a restaurant. I love to eat, I love to cook. My husband and I cook together a lot, but I don't have that professional experience. And while I have certainly read about it and learned from friends who work in restaurants or even own them, enough to create some of my characters who are my spice shop customers, some commercial customers, I could not write from the inside with any authenticity, but I did work as a teenage bookseller. And I've been a retail customer most of my life, right? In various aspects. And so I can learn about the modern trends in retail and give that to my characters very easily. And to me, it's a natural for Seattle because, as I said, I fell in love with the market as a college freshman when I was only 17 or 18. And one of the shops that I most loved was Market Spice. It's right next to, when you go into the market, where you see the men and women who throw the fish, the spice shop is right around the corner from that. Now I moved it and created a different spice shop. There's also another one called World Spice down on Western Avenue. And mine is kind of a blend of the two of them, but it's something that I have loved since I first discovered it. And I wanted to be able to convey some of that on the page. That sense of discovery of food is what Pepper and to a slightly different extent, Erin give their customers.
Well, and that
And I
idea,
want to give that to the
yeah.
readers as well.
well, being able to bring your experience sort of an authentic way to life, but also in a career that you haven't had, but you've observed and been able to learn about, I think is part of the magic of authors, is being able to learn about all these different things.
Oh yeah, a lot of it is wish fulfillment, right? For us as much as it is for readers.
If only life were as easy without the dead bodies. Debra, your character is on the other end of the spectrum, but it obviously tells us a lot about her attitudes towards food. Why did you choose to make the food the way that we got to know about her, as opposed to, it could have been how she dresses or other things? Like how did you land on food and the chef anti sort of aspect?
Well, two aspects. I had written two books prior to this, an academic mystery and a traditional, both of which were orphaned. I wanted to write a cozy. Now I started thinking, what's in a cozy? Small town, I can do that. Southern, I can do that. Amateur sleuth, I can do that. Then I realized there were a few other things. Crafts, I hate those things. Cooking, oh, cry, I know that's not me. So I really had a problem. And then I thought about it and I realized there had to be more people out in the audience who were like me. So I decided to write for me. And I thought, well, one of the things, and when you ever ask me to come and bring a vegetable, I always bring a Stouffer souffle spinach pie. You can imagine what it's made with. And, so I had my first recipe for the books. Then I realized, well, okay, let's use food. We'll give her a twin. And there's two aspects to this. One, Sarah is more frightened of the kitchen than she is of murder. But for me to do the background checking, I had to go interview all my friends. And because I eat out a lot, I have lots of really good. Birmingham, Alabama has become a real foodie town. We have James Beard winners. We have all this stuff. And I know them all. So I went and they took me in the back of their kitchens. And each time I write a book, they showed me things like, this is a professional dishwasher. Oh, good, I can use that in something. This is a, well, here, walk through this room. Is it cold? Oh, look how nice everything is. And when I got out the other side, they asked me, and where do you think you were? And I said, I don't know. They said, you just walked through a freezer. If we hadn't come out, it would have been a closed freezer. So, I got the messages, but I also used quotes from them. Like in one of the books, one of the guys who was a young chef said, see that fixture up there? And he pointed to a light fixture. I could have put a $5,000 fixture in there over the bar, but better I should put a $200 fixture in there and put that other $4,800 into the kitchen, into my equipment. So I learned things, and my friends love it. And for the last aspect, because like when I was writing 4 Cuts Too Many and I needed to know what to do with knives, I sent out a SOS. Hey, how would I kill somebody using an ice pick mechanism with a knife? Do you think I should use a lobster knife? So one of them had me come down, showed me all the knives, and they said, no, you don't want a bread knife, you don't want this. And they showed me what I should actually use. And boy, it was sharp.
We all need to use Debra's tactics because that sounds like the most fun.
Yeah.
Well, and I get to eat. Half the time they know me, so they bring out something to nosh on while I'm there.
Exactly.
And they all enjoy it. I mean, they're all thinking this is the most hilarious series because they all see themselves in some way helping me. And I love it. And that's why Emily, the twin, is such a good chef, because she emulates all my friends. And I steal, and I guess the last comment is, each of the books, unlike some of yours where you stick to Caribbean, or you stick to a certain type of food, you stick to spice or cheese, each book has a different kind of recipe, because it's what hit me at the time. So, one are all drinks like wine spritzers, one are all soups and things, because that's what I was into and that's what people were feeding me at the time.
That's like so much more fun and authentic than like the questionable Google searches that I have to do, where I'm like, oh man, like this has put me on a list. Like, oh.
I mean, I had to do some because I wanted to add a vegan dishes and some, and I did need to Google those to get them right.
You were gonna eat those.
Yeah, but not the murder aspect.
And if you see me making these things,
The cheese lady is not gonna have vegan.
But not as suspicious as how do I kill someone with a lobster knife on Google. So, not getting on the watch list for that one. But it is amazing how many doors are open as a writer. And for anyone who, is in the audience, maybe working on an early book or something, I hope what you've heard here is that you can tell people you're writing on a story and want to learn about their lives, and people love to share that information. And so it's great that you have such a great network to do that, because it translates to your stories too, Debra. It makes them real, which is just something that's a delight to read. Mia, this is your debut series. You've got lots of books in it. Did you do it in sort of a calculated way about, I know about food, or how did you land on food for Lila?
So I was always going to write about food. So like it's two main things. One, culinary cozies are always my favorite. So like my mom is the one who got me into reading cozies. She is a page at a Chicago public library. She, which is it's her job to put books on the shelf. And one day she was shelving books in the mystery section. We're big fans of mysteries in my family, and she was like, "Huh, Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder," which was the first book in the Joanne Fluke series. And she was like, and one day she just messaged me on Facebook like, "Hey, I found, like if there's one thing my family has more than books, it's food." And so she was like, "I found books that combine the two," and so like I buddy read that series with my mom. We read, and I started reading like tons of other cozy series, and obviously the culinary ones are the ones that I led to. Like Debra, I'm like, I want to like handicrafts. I want to so badly, and it just is not. But food is always there for me. It's like that's like a general thing. But another thing, like yes, food is universal, but there's also something just so intrinsically Filipino about food. And so like a common greeting in Tagalog, which is one of the main languages in the Philippines, is kumain ka na ba, which is have you eaten yet? Right. So when you go to someone's house, they're not like, hey, how are you? What's up? It's like, no, have you eaten yet? And if you say no, they'll feed you. And if you say yes, they'll feed you. And so I hadn't, it was felt so natural for me to write food that I hadn't thought that like it's also part of a cultural thing until, oh man, what is time? I don't know. A year or two ago, I was on a panel with other Filipino authors. I was the only cozy writer. So I was on there with a middle grade contemporary writer, adult sci-fi fantasy writer, adult women's fiction. But the only thing that we had in common, because like it was also international. So like people in the Philippines, people in Canada, people in so like all over. The only thing we had in common was our Filipino background. But all of us used food as a really important aspect of our books. And as we were talking, we figured out like it's just such a big part of our culture that it doesn't matter what it is we're writing, food is going to work its way in. And she's right. So I have a book that never got published, my Comic-Con book. There's food in there. Like she's at a comic book convention, but food it shows up. I have a PI short story coming out this summer in August, and food plays a huge role. And it's just like I can't not include it because I feel food is a shorthand for so many things. A shorthand for culture. Particularly if you're a diaspora writer like me and Raquel, food is politics, food is family in my case. It's so many things, and it's just something that really cannot be separated, in my opinion.
I love that. I get chills when you're talking about that because it rings so true. And Leslie was talking about the research, Debra was talking about the research that she does for hers, talking with chefs. And I'm curious, what everyone else needs to do, because as much as sometimes our characters are like us, usually we don't know the same things they know. We need to learn about them. Raquel, what about you? How do you research your books, or do you need to research?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, I mean, Korina is great. She gets to research cheese. I am in the love cheese fan, but also I think Leslie researching spices, I think that would be so interesting. I recently bought a spice blend that's, one of these like artisan gourmet, small batch, whatever things, spices. And I was really intrigued by it because, well, the reason why I bought it was because the cookbook author that I had been following, who had been a food researcher, put out this book, and then she did the collab with this spice people and all of this stuff. And as I read through it and the little stuff, and then it had, like history about this is made in Puerto Rico. This, I forget what, anote is from Puerto Rico, and it's a small farm and blah, blah, blah. And it really like kind of paralleled what my own character, Miriam Quinones, would do. Like it just like really synced with that. So, as far as research, look, in the break time while I was waiting to come on, I was looking over this cookbook, Jamaican cookbook. I mean, that's my research, is that I get to, my mother was a big cookbook collector, and she didn't cook, but she had so many cookbooks. It was ridiculous.
I am too.
Are you? There you go.
I have shelves of them.
Sometimes we eat with our eyes, right? And that's a lot of what a cookbook is. But I do also like the histories and the stories that come with cookbooks. So that is a good bit of my my research, but also because I am writing the cultural and historical part of it, sometimes my rabbit holes is like really historical stuff that doesn't have to do with food, but more of the social economic situation that was going on during the time that a food came in, and why that food began to, be eaten. I think I am definitely a failed academic. I think if somebody had pushed me in the right way during my college years, that I probably would have gone on to, to a PhD or something, because I do enjoy, the putting all the little pieces together.
That is fascinating. I love the idea of just being able to look through cookbooks and look for inspiration. Mia, you talked about your suspicious Google search. So I think you've admitted to a little bit of that. On the food front, are you needing to research the recipes that come up in the restaurant? Are these things that you know from your own life? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I do. That's my favorite kind of research. So whenever that, even in my bio, I say I used to procrastinating as one of my favorite hobbies, because I'm like, oh, it's not procrastination, it's research, right? Yes, I have to make 3 dozen cookies right now. It's research. So for me, the cook in my family was my dad. Again, my mom, bless her, because before she worked at the library, she worked at Walden Books, when those existed. And so she would be bringing home lots of the discount cookbooks. And again, she's like, why are you buying cookbooks? 1, Daddy doesn't use recipes. 2, you don't cook. So, but again, yeah, that's just collecting lots of cookbooks. And so that's how it's my dad didn't use recipes. He was the one who taught me about food, and particularly Filipino food. But because he didn't, he passed in 2018. So because he didn't leave recipes behind, a lot of my research is looking up various recipes and then tweaking them to how I remember his dishes tasting. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience, for me, Filipino food is supposed to taste the way my dad made it. So, a lot of times I'll go to events and they're like, oh, can you recommend Filipino restaurants in Chicago? And it's growing up, we went to restaurants, at least a couple times a month as a family, but we never would eat out Filipino food, because my mom would be like, why would we pay for this when Daddy cooks it better? There's no point. He was a very old school cook. I wanted to get his recipe for adobo, and he would just be like, okay, watch me. And he'll open up a bottle of soy sauce and just pour. And I was like, how much was that? And he's like, about this. And what's the, So a lot of it is me just kind of comparing recipes, tweaking it to my taste, how I remember him making it. And I'm also like very careful, and like, so the first book is arsenic and adobo, so of course I had to include an adobo recipe, which is different than Spanish adobo, by the way, which a lot of people get confused. Like I see Raquel looking at so like Spanish adobo is a seasoning mix.
We need to do a thing about that, you and me. Yeah. We'll
Yeah.
do a video. Yeah.
Whereas in the Philippines, adobo is like a style of cooking. It's different. Like, the Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands, right? It's very different regionally. It differs from family to family. But the kind I grew up with, generally adobo is any sort of food. It can be a protein, it can be a vegetable, whatever, that is cooked with soy sauce, vinegar, bay leaf, black peppercorns, and garlic. And so, like in the description of my recipe, I'm like, this is my family's recipe. But there is no the recipe. So like, kind of take it and, make of it what you will. And so, I complain about the way my dad did recipes, but I'm very much the same. Like in that recipe, I say that, oh, you measure garlic with your heart, right? Anytime I see 1 clove of garlic in a recipe, I'm like, that's cute. No. But yeah, like that's like the vast amount of research is like, okay, here's this titular dish, which means I know I have to include it as a recipe. What are the various versions out there? Okay, let me cobble something together that feels true to this particular family and how they would make it. And also, like, my brother is a nurse, so sometimes I can go to him about certain things. So like that's like it's like questionable Google searches, lots of wasting time. Look, I have like a Google Doc that's pages and pages long of recipes that I'll never make, but I just think it's so much fun to think of recipes that because my main character, so my her family's restaurant makes a traditional, I'm using air quotes for a reason, a Filipino restaurant, while her cafe is more a Filipino fusion. So I just like thinking up all these different fun combinations that I can use instead of actually writing the book.
Well, they talk about research being me search. So, if you didn't love it, then there would not be any joy in writing. So it's good that you're getting that out of it. Leslie, you talked a little bit about the fact that, retail as an employee, as a customer for many years, but obviously, it's different when you sit down and try to bring your character to life and the different elements that need to be in your stories. How does research look for you as an author?
Well, I can tell you we eat a lot better than we did before I started writing foodie fiction. It's great fun. The recipe research is a mix of things. Some of the recipes come from our own kitchen. Some are things I've eaten out and decide that my character needs to eat too, something I have fallen in love with. And sometimes I have had to go searching for a recipe. For example, in the 3rd Spice Shop book, Killing Time, I went looking for various recipes that were time forward, that discovered a lemon thyme shortbread, an orange cinnamon creme brulee with thyme in it that's become the dish we bring for Christmas for dessert. Yes, there are other things too, but that's the one that, oh yep, Don should bring that. Well, he actually is the one who makes it. It's really great to have a spouse who cooks as well. And I forget where you were directing me, and I went back to the other topic, the research.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect.
Okay. And I'm loving the comment in the chat that we're making Carol hungry. I always say, if I made you hungry in my book, I've done my job.
Mission accomplished with the panel. Korina, tell us about cheese and whether, have you learned things along the way that have either changed how you cook? Has it stepped up your game? Have you become the person who they know at your local cheesemonger? Tell us how that looks.
Oh, absolutely. When I first started writing, when I first got the contract for the Cheese Shop series, we had just gone into lockdown for COVID. So, I had imagined, as I was, hoping to get the contract, that I would go to cheese places and, do all this. And of course, at first I couldn't for the first book. So then I just gobbled up everything on Google. But since then, I've been lucky enough to find great cheese shops here in Connecticut. One in particular, Spread Cheese Co. is in Middletown, Connecticut, and they it's owned by two young women, much like Willa. They're in their 30s and they're sisters. And they decided to start a cheese shop. And then the cheesemonger at Spread Cheese is also a young woman entrepreneur, and she's their cheesemonger. And she used to be in academia, and she wasn't happy. And they said, her parents said, well, find a job to make you happy. What would make you happy? And she said, if I could just, learn about and eat cheese all day, I'd be happy. And so she found a way to do that. And so these are the women that now, are my women. And so they're so helpful to me, and they've really opened my mind. Before I started this, the biggest two, as Leslie said, people crave cheese when they read my books, and I love that. And a second compliment that I love is, you must be a cheesemonger yourself, or you must be an expert on cheese. And when I started this, I was just a grocery store cheese kind of gal. I maybe had 5 different kinds of cheeses ever in my life. And so it has opened my mind to so many different kinds of cheeses, and artisan cheese is so different. Even if you get the same kind in a store, in a grocery store, a bigger store, it really is different. And then also the whole cheese making aspect is so very interesting. And I also have met a cheesemaker nearby here in Connecticut, a young woman who makes her own cheese, and she also works for Cato Corner Farms. And so soon I will be going to her farm and that creamery and learning about, and she's going to let me make cheese with her. So I'm very excited about that. So just that whole aspect, because every type of cheese is made differently. There's so many aspects of it. And then, as Raquel was saying, the historical aspect of it, cheese goes back centuries, and so some people still make them in caves, and in Europe, and even in Oregon there are caves that blue cheeses. My last book that I've just been writing is Case of the Blues, and it's all about blue cheese. And so I find out about, how the mold and everything grows and those kind of cheeses. It's just fascinating, and it's never ending. There's always something to be learned about cheese. So my cooking has not gotten better. I'm very much like Debra in that case. I'm a terrible cook. I don't particularly like it. Right now I'm by myself. I don't even have my son anymore, and my son does not like cheese. So when I get cheese, and you can't get too small of a cheese, they only sell a certain amount. So when I get cheese, I'm forced to eat the whole thing on my own, but my women at Spread Cheese, when I go, they let me, whatever I want to try, so that I could make notes and do it. And it's fantastic. It's me search. It's definitely me search.
Jen, can I jump in with a funny story? I was with my best friend in Seattle. She lives there and does some ground truthing for me. And she's a terrific cook, and she's even tested some of my recipes. She's never tested a murder weapon for me, though. Anyway, we went to a place called Big John's, which is a specialty food store aimed at the restaurant supply world, but it's also open to the public. And she wanted some feta, and she had bought it there before. And the cheesemonger behind the counter, and I love that they actually do call themselves cheesemongers, he wanted us to understand that they had a new supplier, and this was going to be a little bit different flavor than she had before. And so she should try it. And she said, oh no, I don't need to try it. Yes, you do need to try it. And he gave her a piece. And because I was visibly with her, he gave me a piece. He insisted upon it. He was not going to let her buy that cheese without tasting it, because he wanted to make sure she got the flavor profile that she had in mind. And that at that point, it was a term I hadn't heard before. And so I just loved watching how food professionals work with their customers. She was just a woman buying cheese for her family. She wasn't buying it for her Greek restaurant, but he wanted her to have that right flavor. And so I have loved giving that perspective to my characters as well, to make sure that their customers get what they want, what they have in mind. Sometimes they can't articulate just what it is. So it's a lot of fun. And obviously we're talking way more about food than we are about the crimes and the criminal investigations, because, you know, it's just so much fun.
It is, and that reminds me of Mia's comment about you can't just say a clove of garlic, because little clove, big clove, you know, feta isn't feta. Everything is different and needs to be that hands-on experience. And
I certainly can't say that about pepper or about paprika or even about basil and thyme. You have to get more specific, and it's just been great fun to learn.
Well, one thing that I'm really curious about is that we've talked about the heroes and the journeys. I think we got a little taste at the front about the journeys that they're on. You know, there's often some self-discovery, people going through change, learning to really stand on their 2 feet. And another thing that really, I think, defines Cozies is the world that surrounds the main character. And everyone here writes series. And before we open this up to questions, I would just love to take a minute talking about the supporting cast in your books, because I think that those are some who tell us a lot about the characters, but oftentimes they have their own issues and struggles as well that really bring them to life. And so, Leslie, can you just tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters in your book? And I know you mentioned offline sort of being interested in the male characters in your books and sort of how they're
right. There's a lot of talk in writing circles about the hero's journey, and it's a structure we all know, but I have long thought of it as primarily a male journey that didn't specifically apply to women's lives. Now, obviously, a dozen Disney princesses prove me wrong, but I think that for women, the key journey, the heroine's journey, is the search for identity. And whenever I say this, I'm always really quick to say, not that men don't have questions of identity and sense of self too. So when I wrote Peppermint Barked, which you can see behind me, it came out last summer and it's obviously a Christmas mystery, I decided to be specific about looking at the male characters in Pepper's life and look at their journeys for identity and what challenges come up for them. Her best friend in the market, Vinny, the wine merchant, one of her employees, Matt, her boyfriend, Nate, the fisherman, and then also a couple of characters who come in because of the specific crimes in this particular book. And it was really interesting to think about that from a male perspective. Lots of conversations with male friends about that too, and just thinking about how does that look, and is it truly different for women? It tends to be, I think, a little bit more job focused, but it can also be relationship focused too. And what are the influences that have come into play? And that was really a lot of fun.
Debra, tell us about your surrounding world. We've got our not food phobic, but you know, the not domestic goddess. What's her surrounding world like, and has it changed as the series has gone on?
Yes, it has. Her twin sister, as we know, is the chef, who is not only a professional, who has a business sense, but she also believes that food has to be made with love. That's the main ingredient. She has come back to the small town, Whedon, but she has a question. There's a gentleman there who's also a chef, and we learn about him because whereas Emily and Sarah can keep their heads in a crisis, Marcus can't, and yet he can cook. If you think of Mario Bali, you know, the big balloon pants and all, you can imagine what this guy looks like. I also used a Mother Maybelle. Mother Maybelle is only mentioned in the first book. She comes into play in the second, and she is definitely in play in the fifth book, which is The 5 Bells Too Many, the most recent one, because Mother Maybelle is about 60. She runs, let's put it this way, she can say, bless your heart, and you think she's praising you. And one of the things, like in the fifth book, she understands the world around you. In a small town, it's a big thing, like when a television show comes in to do A Perfect Southern Wedding, which is what happens here. And she's smart enough to say that she and her friend George, who is the bow tie, very much of the academic type world, but an animal lover, and there's a lot of animal loving in my books. There's veterinarians and things of that nature. I try to bring in the whole diverse crowd, and that's something that you'll find in the books. There are almost every kind of personality is represented, every kind of race is represented, every kind of religion and gender and sex, everything's in there because that's what we have in our communities. So each character isn't meant to be, this is the blank, but they're there as a person. And if it just happens that they have an aspect, it's wonderful. And as I was going to say in 5 Bells, she's smart enough to know that they're going to need an older couple. So she's the geriatric couple with the couple that reminds you of Jed and Ellie Mae, against the couple that loves the University of Alabama, against the couple that loves the University of Auburn, and you get the picture. And also there's ones who like Days of the Dead, but they're they're there, and so you get all these different things mixed in. And you get my recipes. And I just wanted to say, Kensington thought my recipes and such got so funny after a while. We don't have the love that most of you have, that they actually put together a book, Simple Recipes for the Sometimes Sleuth, which you can download for free off my my website. But I mean, I make the book is the community. And Sarah is a part of that community, but she is a primary part. And so is Rara, who runs the world, but is only a cat.
Got to work the cat in. Raquel, how about the community in your book? Or series, how has it changed for Miriam?
Well, so she's moved from New York with her young family back to Miami. She's moved into the rich enclave that she's married into, her husband's family, while her family lives 10 miles away in Hialeah, which is another city within Miami-Dade that is almost exclusively Spanish speaking, and very working class. So I have kind of two worlds going on. Also, her television network is set in Hialeah, so that Spanish speaking world. And so, we've got working class versus, this upper class, rich enclave. I did that on purpose so that I could have diversity of socioeconomic and goals and what they're interested in and culture and so forth. But her community is what she's making. So she's actually kind of having to rebuild her community. Like we've all said, that's one of the tropes of a cozy mystery, right? Is coming into a new town. And so her best friend from grade school is a realtor in this rich enclave, and she's kind of worked she's definitely worked very, very hard to be very good at it and be like the one that everybody knows. So she has that on her side, but then she's got to meet all of these new people. So we have Jorge, who's the Mambo size instructor. She becomes good friends with her sister-in-law, and who has young children that her Manny, her 4-year-old, can play with. And then we meet a new woman, Pepper, Leslie, her name is Pepper, that she does become good friends with. And then in the book 2, I bring in a couple of more. By book 2, she kind of has her girl squad down that I reference. They find their friend Marie. She owns a Haitian food truck. She comes into the fold. And so that's kind of the core of them right there. But yeah, I love writing those secondary characters. You can do so much with them that you can't necessarily do with your protagonist. They can have, problems that don't need to be solved, problems that can be fun or quirks, I should say, where your main character needs to be a little bit more consistent and strong from book to book. Your secondary characters, you could throw them something crazy, where you can't really do that with your primary character.
I love that idea of the freedom that they give you, and they can always be on vacation in book 3 if they need to, they don't have to be there. Mia, how about you? What is the secondary character world like? Is that one that brings you joy to write? Is it one that is hard? How does that play out?
I mean, the secondary, like Raquel would say, they're so much fun that they sometimes will run the risk of overtaking the protagonist if you're not careful. So I had that problem with Arsenic and Adobo, which is the first one. Adina is the best friend character, the Pakistani Muslim, vegetarian lesbian. And she had an entire subplot that I had to cut because it was fascinating, and it gave me as the author great insight into who she was as a character and where that character was in her life, but it wasn't adding to the story, which was Lila's story. And so I had to remove that and just kind of like, well, I know this and that kind of thing. And so with my books, as in, we were talking earlier about family being a huge thing. So my series title is Tita Rosie's Kitchen. Tita means aunt in Tagalog. So the series is not even named after my protagonist, right? Which goes to, and the fact that her aunt, because her parents passed away when she was younger, she was raised by her paternal aunt and grandmother. The fact that her aunt named her own restaurant using the title of her as an aunt, I mean, she has her own kid, but that's a whole nother story. It kind of shows like the bond between them. And a lot of my books are the idea that the family, yes, but what does it mean to be family, right? Because just because you're blood don't make you family. And even if you're not blood related, doesn't mean that you're not. And so we play with that a lot, because a lot of time, we have a lot of titles that we use that are more generational, right? Tita, yes, it means aunt, but it doesn't always mean like your blood or familiar relation. It can mean, women of a certain generation. In this book, she's an only child, but she seems to have like a ton of cousins, but none of them are blood related cousins, even though they will use these certain titles and connections. And so I play around with that a lot. And it's one of the hard things is that with each book, you introduce new characters, which means your cast grows, which means I'm like, oh, how do I fit all these people in? Which it's great because it can give you so many ideas of like, okay, well, this person was introduced, which means in this book I can do this. But at the same time, it's a huge balance. It's an ensemble cast. It's a big balancing act. I see the calendar aunties. So the calendar crew are her godmothers, because in Filipino culture, it's common to have multiple godparents. Like I personally have 3 godmothers. So me and I have 2 younger brothers. We each have 3 godmothers and 3 godfathers. And so, which means there's like 9 godmothers and godfathers between the 3 of us. And because we all use the same title for them, which is Ninang or Ninong, I'm like, I don't actually know who my godmother is, or like which ones of the ones that I use that title with are my personal godmothers versus my brother's godmothers, because they're all just like, like, again, that's what I mean about like the idea of family. It's being very fluid, it's being very nebulous, and that kind of connection. So the book I'm working on now, my copy edits are due on Tuesday. Features the calendar crew, which are her aunties, the godmother characters, which are like the Greek chorus. They're always seen together, and they are the ones that shower love and judgment upon her. I think many of us know, again, like what's one of the great things about these books. I'll do events, or I'll be like, oh, like I'm not Filipino, but I'm Italian or Jamaican or Puerto Rican or Jewish, like, but I know these women, right? Like I know these particular like relationships. And so writing the calendar crew, who are like not the most fun people to experience in real life, because those backhanded compliments are very real, but they are super, super fun to write. And so the book 4, which is titled Murder in Mamon, focuses on those particular side characters.
I love that they're getting their moment to shine. Cannot wait to see it. Korina, how about you? You've got a whole host of folks to be juggling in your world that you've created. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, as Mia said, it does grow with each book, the community does, but I love that too. And I love inserting them and thinking about what they're doing. But my main cast, the main group of characters that are Willa's best friends and that help her investigate the crimes, they call themselves Team Cheese now in book 3. I wanted to play with intergenerational friendships. So, you know, one of her employees is a 19-year-old Archie. Another employee is widowed, retired high school teacher, Mrs. Schultz, who's smack dab in her 60s, as she likes to say. And so each of them, Willa and Archie and Mrs. Schultz, and even Baz, the next door neighbor, he's in his late 20s. He's the handyman. They're all going through their own kind of you know, coming of age, deciding, getting out of their comfort zones and deciding what they want out of life. And that doesn't change. That doesn't just happen when you're Archie's age at 19, who he gets out of high school. Everybody expects him to know what he wants to do in life. He doesn't. Now he thinks that maybe he wants to be a cheesemonger. He's finally found something he's passionate about. But, you know, that doesn't just happen. Mrs. Schultz, with having been widowed, this is not what she thought her retirement was going to look like. So she stepped back into, you know, the workforce just for something to do. And now she's kind of finding herself again and using, you know, things that were always great about her as a high school drama teacher, you know, to as far as investigating and her friendships. And, you know, Baz has a family who they work in all the family business. It's the house contractors, and he was expected to go into that business. He didn't like it. He wanted to step back. So he's deciding, you know, how does he fit in now to his family when he's doing that. And of course, Willa is coming into her own. So they're all in different ways, helping each other through this kind of similar experiences.
Oh, I love the worlds that you have created in these books. And there is a link in the chat to the bookshop. So I hope everybody who's on will check out the books and look for them. I've promised time for Q&A, and we had one question in the chat about favorite cookbooks that I think everybody has answered there. Are there any, we're bumping right up on our time, but if anyone has a question, I think I've gotten permission to take an extra like 2 minutes if there is a question in the Q&A. But this has been so much fun. I am starving as promised and love the characters you've created. So I think at this point, it's time to hand the talk over to Tina de Bellegarde, who is going to give the closing remarks. But thank you. This has been a pleasure. Everyone check out the book.
Jen.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.